500 years before Julius Caesar destroyed it, 500 years before Augustus replaced it with one-man rule. The Roman Republic was the most remarkable political experiment the ancient world had ever attempted. A system designed specifically to prevent any single person from becoming too powerful. A government where power was shared, checked, and temporary, where laws applied to everyone equally, where elections determined leadership, where citizens had rights that even the most powerful man in Rome had to respect. This system lasted 500 years, conquered the Mediterranean world, and inspired the founders of the United States of America. This is the story of the Roman Republic, the greatest democracy the ancient world ever built. The Roman Republic was built on one fundamental fear: the tyranny of kings. After expelling their last king in 509 BC, Romans were determined that no single person would ever hold absolute power again. They created an elaborate system of shared power with multiple checks and balances. At the top sat two consuls, elected annually, each with the power to veto the other's decisions. Below them were various magistrates, praetors who administered justice, censors who counted citizens and controlled morality, quaestors who managed finances, and aediles who maintained public buildings. Every position was annual, collegial, meaning shared by at least two people, and unpaid. Wealth, public service, and ambition drove men to seek these positions. The most powerful institution in the Roman Republic was not the consuls. It was the Senate. The Senate was a council of approximately 300 senior statesmen, former magistrates who had served Rome in various capacities. They held their positions for life, giving them enormous accumulated experience and institutional knowledge that annually rotating magistrates could never match. The Senate controlled Rome's finances, its foreign policy, its military commands, and its provincial administration. Technically, it could only advise. In practice, its advice was almost always followed, because only the Senate had the knowledge, the experience, and the relationships to make Rome function. No consul could effectively govern without Senate support. The Senate was Rome's brain. The Roman Republic was born with a fundamental contradiction. It proclaimed equality under law while maintaining rigid class divisions. Roman society was divided between Patricians, the ancient aristocratic families who claimed descent from Rome's original senators, and Plebeians, everyone else. The Patricians monopolized political power initially. Only Patricians could be consuls, senators, or priests. Only Patricians could interpret the laws. The plebeians were the majority of Roman citizens, including farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and soldiers who fought Rome's wars. They paid taxes and died in battles but had almost no political voice. This inequality created constant tension that threatened to tear the Republic apart almost from its very beginning. The plebeian fight for political rights, called the Struggle of the Orders, was one of the most significant political movements in ancient history. It lasted approximately 2 centuries, from roughly 494 to 287 BC. The plebeians' most powerful weapon was surprisingly simple: they refused to fight. In 494 BC, the plebeians left Rome entirely and camped on a nearby hill, a mass withdrawal called the Cessatio Plebis. Without soldiers, Rome was defenseless. The patricians were forced to negotiate. The result was the creation of the Tribune of the Plebs, a new office with the extraordinary power to veto any action by any Roman magistrate. The word veto itself is Latin. It means, "I forbid." One of the plebeians' most important demands was that Roman law be written down and made publicly available. Until 450 BC, Roman law existed only in the heads of patrician priests and magistrates who could interpret and apply it however they wished. The plebeians demanded written laws that everyone could read and understand. The result was the 12 Tables, Rome's first written law code, inscribed on 12 bronze tablets and displayed publicly in the Forum. Everyone could read them. Nobody could claim ignorance. Nobody could selectively interpret them. The 12 Tables established fundamental principles: presumption of innocence, right to appeal, equal treatment under law. These principles still underpin modern legal systems everywhere in the world. The Roman Republic's greatest achievement was military. The Roman legion was the most effective fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. Unlike the massive, unwieldy armies of Eastern empires, the Roman legion was organized into smaller, flexible units called maniples that could operate independently on varied terrain. Roman soldiers were not professionals initially. They were citizens who owned property and could afford their own equipment. Fighting for Rome was both a civic duty and a path to honor. The Republic's army conquered the entire Italian peninsula by 265 BC, not through overwhelming numbers, but through superior organization, iron discipline, and a military system that could learn from defeat and adapt consistently. Rome's military genius was only half the story. What made Rome truly exceptional was what it did after winning. Most ancient empires simply extracted tribute from conquered peoples and moved on. Rome did something revolutionary. It offered conquered peoples a path to becoming Roman. Some defeated enemies received full Roman citizenship. Others received partial citizenship with commercial rights. Local elites were often incorporated into Roman institutions. Conquered peoples were required to provide soldiers for Rome's armies, but those soldiers fought alongside Romans and eventually could earn citizenship for themselves. This system transformed enemies into allies and allies into Romans. It created an expanding circle of loyalty that made the Republic far larger and more resilient than any purely military empire. The Roman Republic's greatest test came from Carthage. 3 wars, called the Punic Wars, were fought between Rome and Carthage from 264 to 146 BC. The Second Punic War nearly destroyed Rome when Carthage's brilliant general Hannibal invaded Italy and won battle after devastating battle, killing approximately 70,000 Romans at Cannae. But the Republic showed its greatest strength in this crisis. It refused to surrender even when all logic suggested it should. It raised new armies repeatedly from its pool of citizen soldiers and Italian allies. It changed strategy and eventually took the war to Africa itself. Rome survived Hannibal. Then it destroyed Carthage completely. The Mediterranean world now belonged entirely to Rome. Every Roman standard, every official document, every public building bore the letters SPQR, Senatus Populesque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome. These 4 letters encapsulated the entire Republican philosophy. Power belonged not to a single ruler but to 2 entities, the Senate representing accumulated wisdom and experience, and the people representing the democratic will of Roman citizens. The constant tension between these 2 sources of authority drove Roman politics, fueled its greatest achievements, and ultimately caused its destruction. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon and when Augustus created the empire, both were resolving this tension in favor of one-man rule. SPQR became an ironic reminder of a system that no longer existed. It still appears on Roman manholes in modern Rome today. By the 2nd century BC, the Republic's success was creating problems that would eventually destroy it. Rome's conquest of the Mediterranean brought enormous wealth, but that wealth concentrated increasingly in the hands of the patrician elite. Small farmers who had served in Rome's armies returned home to find their land had been absorbed by wealthy landowners using slave labor from conquered territories. The gap between rich and poor was growing dangerously. 2 brothers named Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus attempted to address this inequality through land reform legislation in 1303 and 123 BC respectively. Both were killed by political opponents. Their deaths marked the beginning of a century of political violence that would eventually destroy the Republic completely. The Roman Republic had a fatal flaw built into its very design. It was created to govern a city-state. By the 2nd century BC, it was governing a Mediterranean empire. The institutions designed for a small community of a few thousand citizens simply could not scale up effectively to govern millions of people across 3 continents. Generals commanding armies far from Rome for years developed personal loyalties from their soldiers that superseded loyalty to the Republic. Wealth from empire corrupted the electoral system. Popular generals could threaten or actually use their armies against the state. The Republic's checks and balances worked only as long as all participants chose to respect them. When they stopped, the system had no mechanism to enforce compliance. The Roman Republic lasted 500 years and gave the world political innovations that still shape governance today. The concept of checks and balances between government branches traces directly to the Roman Republican system. The United States Senate takes both its name and its concept from the Roman Senate. The idea that laws should be written, public, and apply equally to everyone comes from the 12 Tables. The right to veto legislation, the concept of civic duty, The idea that political office should be temporary and shared, all Roman Republican inventions. When America's founding fathers designed their new government, they deliberately modeled it on the Roman Republic, studying its achievements and desperately trying to avoid its fatal mistakes. By the 1st century BC, the Republic was held together more by habit and tradition than by genuine institutional strength. Political violence had become normal. Generals like Marius and Sulla had already marched armies against Rome itself. The first triumvirate of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus dominated politics through wealth and military power, rather than republican institutions. The Senate struggled to maintain relevance against men who commanded personal armies and personal fortunes that dwarfed the state's resources. Cicero, Rome's greatest orator and a passionate defender of the Republic, sensed the danger and said so publicly and eloquently. But the momentum toward one-man rule was already unstoppable. Caesar was coming, and the Republic was running out of time. The Roman Republic lasted 500 years. It conquered the Mediterranean world. It created political innovations that still govern billions of people today. It failed not because its ideas were wrong, but because human ambition, inequality, and the corrupting influence of empire proved too powerful for any institutional system to contain permanently. Its story is both an inspiration and a warning. An inspiration because it proved that shared power, written law, and civic participation can build extraordinary civilizations. A warning because it showed that these things must be actively defended by every generation, or they will be lost. Julius Caesar is coming in our next video, and the Republic is about to die.